Welcome, this is Jennifer McGuire, and this is one of those videos where I go slightly overboard. I have a lot of cards for you. It's a longer video, but I promise I packed it full of ideas. Although I will be using Lindy's magic powders today, you can do these techniques with different watercolors, powders, or sprays that you may already have on hand. So I encourage you to watch. I'm hoping there's something that will work for you. Now, this is all about taking your embossing folders, adding lots of color to it, and creating a fun background very quickly. Because I wanted really shimmery, magical looking backgrounds, I chose to use Lindy's magical powders. I just did a video showing more about these and showing you swatches of many of the colors. I will link to that up here on the top right, at the end of this video, and in my description below. These are dye-based pigment powders, and they're very different than others because they have a lot of shimmer to them, and they're dye-based and they stain instead of kind of floating. So this is something that really gives you bold color very easily. You can choose softer colors if you want a softer look or use more water. They can be used in many ways, and today is just another one of them. If you don't have these powders, any of the different type of powders similar to it would work, or you could use watercolors and sprays, and I'll mention that as we go. Now, this is a Tim Holtz watercolor paper. I was writing WC on the back, so I would remember this was watercolor paper. I thought I was going to try other cardstocks, but it turns out I stuck with watercolor paper for the whole video. You could also try using a really heavyweight cardstock. Now for embossing folders, I'm using some new ones from Gina Designs. This one's my favorite. It's the Tapestry embossing folder, and it matches a stamp set she came out with many years ago, and I'll use that later too. These are 2D embossing folders. That means there's lowered areas and raised areas. You can see they're a bit thinner than 3D embossing folders, but these are great for a lot of techniques, and you'll see it gives a beautiful impression. What I also like about Gina's embossing folders is they're big enough to do a 5x7 background or a mini slimline background. I like having that option. Let's get started with using these powders in the embossing folder. I'm going to show you a few different ways to do it, and I will talk about other products you can use too. So I've opened up the embossing folder, and this is the back side of the front of the folder. And I'm brushing on some teal powders. They don't look teal right now, but you'll see they'll be very bold teal when we add water. So I'm sprinkling some powder on here. Now I used quite a bit here. It's still not that much. There's a lot in that jar. A little goes a long way. But if you want a softer look, you could definitely use less than I used here. I'm using a fan brush that's dry to kind of brush them over this textured area of the embossing folder. This is one of the many ways to do this. You'll see many throughout this video. Okay, so after I've brushed this in, I will get my die cut machine ready. I chose to use my Platinum 6 die cut machine today, but you could use absolutely any die cut machine that you may have. For this machine, I decided to use the platform, a folded piece of heavyweight cardstock as a shim, also a metal shim, and then we'll use the embossing folder. But first we're going to spray all of that powder inside of the folder. I'm not overspraying it unless you want a really blended look. You could spray it less if you want more of a splotchy look. I'm just kind of going a medium amount here. You can still see some of the gold, and you can see that bright blue popping up. Now I'm taking a piece of watercolor paper and laying it right onto that and closing it, making sure it doesn't shift as we do this. I will then put this on top of the metal shim and then add one of the regular cutting plates on top. You may notice that my hands get a little inky. That's okay. It's a good excuse to not do any housework because you work so hard with your crafting. I do go back and forth a few times to really press that watercolor in. Now when I take it out, check out this result. It will be still splotchy, but this will give beautiful results when it dries. So I'm going to set that aside, and after I gave it some time to dry, this is what we have. Look at that gold shimmer that has come to the surface. You can see some of the pattern, but stick with me. Later on, I'm going to make the backgrounds even better. We're going to step them up with a simple thing, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's do some more examples. Here I'm doing the same thing, and I'm just brushing the color right into the embossing folder. Now, as far as what colors I recommend of the magical powders, I encourage you to just look at them and choose what colors appeal to you most. I used a variety today, some of that are my favorites, so you could try that too if you wanted. I put the names on the top. Now this time I put the powders in and the paper, but I have not sprayed with water yet. This gives a different look. I am running it through my die cut machine as I did before. Now that powder is kind of impressed onto that cardstock. So it looks white right now, but watch as we spray it, look at those effects. So this gives you more coverage than the other way. Both options are nice. If you find you want some more bold color here and there, you can sprinkle some more powder onto the wet areas, even spritz it a bit more. Totally up to you. You can add more, or if you want to take away some, put more water on it and dab it away. So after setting that aside and giving it some time to dry, this is what we get. We still have the texture, but we'll enhance that later. Again, stick with me for that. But remember, I still have powder inside of my embossing folder. So I'm just going to spray the inside of the embossing folder. I didn't add any powder, just spray it into there, add a piece of watercolor paper, run it back and forth. So I'm getting 2 for 1 out of this. The first time I didn't use water, and I added the water after using the embossing folder. This time I'm just using the leftover powder in the embossing folder, spraying it, adding paper, and running it through. So we'll get another background this time. This will have some white areas and some colorful areas, and I just love that shimmer that comes to the surface. The shimmer stands out more this way thanks to the embossing folder really pressing it into the cardstock. And this is what it looks like after it dries. Now here's a third way you can use these powders or any sprays or watercolor with your embossing folder. This time I'm taking watercolor paper, putting it in my embossing folder. There's really no powders left in there. It looks messy, but there's really nothing in there. And I'm just running it through to get that impression. So this will just be white watercolor paper with that impression on it. And now we'll add the powders over that impression. So I'm just kind of tapping on a few different color powders. I just added some greens onto here. You can mix these powders as much as you want. Every time you'll get a different look. After I added the powders, we'll give this a good spray with the water bottle. This way gives you a little more control over how mixed color you want, or if you want it to be more blended. It's hard to describe, but you can see there I put quite a bit of water so you get more coverage and more blending. You can also add more powder this way if you need more color in certain areas. This happened to be one of my favorite ways to do this. And I find this works well with any kind of sprays, distress oxide spray, distress spray stain. You could use pretty much anything for this, or even brush watercolor over it. Whatever you have would work. All right, now that one, when you set it aside, look how beautiful this is. You can see some of the impression is lost, but we'll bring it back a little bit later in this video. But that color is beautiful. All right, let's do another. This time I'm using the Gina K Designs Swiss Dot embossing folder. This is one of those embossing folders that I feel is a must-have because it works with a variety of style cards. And I love that it's 5x7, so you can use it for a variety of sizes too. Notice as I brush across this, the powder is kind of filling in the holes of the embossing folder. Now here I'm adding a few different colors here. I did some red, some purple, some blue, and I'm just brushing it on with that fan brush. It may look like I'm using a lot because I keep going back to the jar, but I'm really only picking up a little bit each time. A little goes a very long way with these, and I'm going for bold backgrounds. If you want softer, you could use even less. Another thing you could do here is brush on different watercolors. Just paint inside of the embossing folder and do this process the same way. Okay, so now I'm spraying the inside of the embossing folder. I wanted to try that technique with this folder. So I'm spraying it. Look at that color just activate. I will then lay my watercolor paper in there, close the embossing folder, and run it back and forth a few times. When I have any kind of watercolor or spray inside of the folder with my watercolor paper, I like to go back and forth to just really work it into the paper. That creates some areas where it's a little bit darker and some areas where it's a little bit lighter. And here we have those dark dots because we push that powder in, and you can see the different colors there. One thing I want to mention is if you're not happy with the result when it's wet, give it time to dry and try trimming it down. I promise you'll like it in the end. This is one of those techniques where it's a hot mess at first, but ends up drying nicely. One of the reasons I chose to use the Lindy's magical powders is the amount of shimmer it has. I wish I could capture it in the video. After doing some experimenting, I found my favorite way to use the powders with embossing folder is to brush them into the folder. You can choose which side you want to. You can test both. And use multiple colors. So I just brush the different colors right into the folder, covering the inside as much as I can. You don't need a whole lot. Then I put my cardstock into it and run it through dry. For some reason, I just really like how this applies that powder, and I also like that there will be leftovers in the folder for a second background. So here I'm putting the watercolor paper in. I'll run it back and forth. That presses those powders up against that background. And then we can spray the background with as much water as we want. If you want it to be a little more splotchy, you can use less water. If you want it to be a little more blended, you can use more water. Now it looks a little intense here, but when it dries, look how beautiful this is. It has some gold shimmer, thanks to one of the magical powders I used, and some iridescent shimmer, thanks to a different color I used. So you have lots of colors popping up and lots of different shimmer. Now remember that folder still has some leftover powder inside of it, because we put it in there dry, did the dry cardstock. So now I'm just spraying the inside of the folder to activate all of that powder, putting another piece of watercolor paper in there, and running it back and forth a few times through the die cut machine. If you take it out and decide you want a little more blending or a little more intense color, you can give more spray to it. So just spray it with a bit more water. Now I'll set this aside to dry, and when I come back to it, you have this beautiful textured background with lots of different colors and tons of shimmer. If you are using watercolor or a spray without shimmer, you can sprinkle on some Perfect Pearls from Ranger. That is a great way to add shimmer also. We can get a third background out of this too. So look at all that leftover powder and water on my work surface. I work on a glass work surface for this reason. I can drag a piece of watercolor paper through that powder and water to create a purple background. And I'll just take that while it's wet, put it into the embossing folder and run it back and forth. And look at, there's still a lot of color on my work surface that I could pick up with another background. So if you're using watercolor powders or spray and you have excess on your work surface, be sure to put that to work. This won't look like much when we dry it, when we give it some time to dry. However, I will come back and add something to it to make the background a little more special. A few more examples and tips. This time I'm using the Gina K Designs Plaid Embossing Folder. Again, this is 5x7, so you can use it on your bigger cards. I am just tapping and brushing in some of the powder right into those indentations. So you can see how it fills those areas. And that's really what you want to do. If you want really bold color, you want to fill in the areas just by brushing back and forth. All right, now I will spray this, put some watercolor paper inside of it and run it through my die cut machine. This time I'm using one of the lighter colors, so I'll end up with a lighter background. You'll notice that the impressed areas, that plaid pattern, will look a little bit darker when it comes out. However, if you want to really intensify this look, you can add more powder afterwards. You can do this either on top of a dry background or a wet background. It really doesn't matter. Here mine is dry, so I'm sprinkling a few different powders on top of it. And then when we spray it, it'll activate all that additional color and you'll see it's much more intense. It'll also be very wet. One of the fun things you can do with these backgrounds that have the texture from the embossing folder is take another dry piece of watercolor paper and touch it on top. Just press it down and watch this. You pick up the pattern on it. So there are really a lot of possibilities with these techniques, and you can make multiple backgrounds very quickly. Once this one's dry, look at all of that beautiful color and shimmer. Now, if you're not big into kind of artsy looking backgrounds like this, don't worry. I'm going to give these a clean and simple look when we turn them into cards. All right, now I told you I went overboard, so here's another example. This time I just used the embossing folder dry onto watercolor paper. And onto the back side where the impression is kind of pressed down, the image is the valley. I'm brushing on some of these bold reddish purple looking powders. And so it's kind of filling in the areas. And now I'll spray it generously with water. And look how intense that is. It kind of fills in those areas. So this is the back side of what people usually use. It'll look like a hot mess at first, but when it dries, look at this. The shimmer kind of settles in those valleys in the image. So you get really intense results with tons of shimmer. It's just a really fun way to use any kind of product that has shimmer to it. Now here are a bunch of backgrounds I created. I did all of these off screen using a variety of the techniques I showed you today. This is one of those techniques or products that I really feel is worth experimenting with. Make as many backgrounds as you can at once. Try one side of the embossing folder, try the other side, see what different looks you get. And that way you can get more out of your watercolors or your powders, more out of your embossing folders, and you'll quickly have a lot of backgrounds you can use on many different cards. You will also get to know your products better, which I think is really important. The best way to make the most of a product, such as watercolor or powders or sprays, is to use them for experimenting. Then you'll feel more comfortable with them and can use them on a single card anytime you want. Next, let's take all of those backgrounds and really enhance the pattern or the embossing that we did on it. Sometimes when you add a lot of water to a background that used an embossing folder, it loses some of the details. So we're going to bring it back in a variety of ways. The first thing that you can do is take your background and put it back into the embossing folder, relining it up with the pattern. So here's one of my inky embossed backgrounds. I will use a baby wipe on the back to add a little moisture. You could instead spray it with a water bottle, and I'll just run it across the inside of the embossing folder till it pops in place, until you can be sure that the pattern is lining up with the embossing folder. Once you feel it pop in place, I'll show another way to do it in a moment, you can just run it back through your die cut machine, just like you did before. If you want to, you can add another cardstock shim to give more pressure. You just want to test your machine. Now this will really re-enhance that impression that you made with the embossing folder, and look how beautiful that is. Another very easy way to make that embossed image stand out, or that impression stand out, is to rub a white pigment ink over it. I'm using a Holtz Brayer and white pigment ink and just lightly rolling it over the raised areas. You can see how that makes that pattern stand out even more. You could also use a dark ink to make it stand out and be darker, but I wanted mine to be a little bit lighter. And there you can see the beautiful results. You still see the shine, and you still see all the color, and now you see the pattern even more. Here's another that was kind of washed out, so I ran it through the embossing folder again, and then used the white pigment ink and brayer over the raised areas. Now this is that one that was really intense with the powder kind of falling into the pattern. This is one of the easiest ways to line it up. Just put it in and kind of close it and just shift your cardstock until you see the pattern on your inky background lining up with the pattern on the embossing folder. Then just run it through the die cut machine to press that pattern into your background, and you can see it stands out more. Now to make this stand out even more, I'm lightly rubbing white pigment ink over it. Now remember, this one I did the embossing folder upside down, so the indentations are the pattern. So the background now will have that white ink instead. So I put white ink on it. I decided to wipe some of it away, and now you can see the pattern stands out more, but we still have the bold color and tons of shimmer. All right, here's another. This time I didn't even bother using the embossing folder again. Instead, I just rubbed that white pigment ink over the raised areas so that I could get that pattern to stand out even more. Now, all of my backgrounds today are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, but remember, the Gina K embossing folders are bigger, so if you want to make bigger backgrounds, you definitely can. And look at all that golden iridescent shimmer on this background. Now remember that bonus background where I just dragged it through all the excess powder and water on my work surface and it just ended up like a boring purple? Well, here I'm using white ink over the raised areas and I feel like it steps it up quite a bit. So remember that white pigment ink can really make a difference. Also remember, you can try today's techniques with embossing folders using different types of watercolors, sprays, or powders. So try what you have. And then try using the white pigment ink and a brayer on top. It really makes a big difference in the end. Now it's time to turn these backgrounds into cards, and I have some other ideas to share with you as we go. So a lot of people have been asking about the liquid adhesive I use. I used to use Gina K Designs Connect in a smaller bottle, but since then she's come out with this bigger bottle and an empty fine tip bottle. What I like to do is squeeze the Connect glue, which is the same as it's always been, out of the big bottle into this fine tip bottle. And that way I can get really nice precision. It's also easy to lift up a die cut and kind of squeeze some adhesive under it. There is that little topper that you can hook to the bottle, but I've been leaving mine off lately. So I use this for pretty much all of my adhesive. There are a few exceptions, but anytime I want to glue paper together or die cuts together, it seems this is what I reach for the most. It may look like I'm putting a lot down, but I'm squeezing very little out, so I don't have any warping and I can be sure this will dry nice and tight. This is a very secure adhesive and I've had no problems with it. I really like that fine tip bottle. On a textured background like this, I tend to use a little bit more of the liquid adhesive since some of it will get into like the nooks and crannies of the texture, and I want to be sure it stays. Next, I have some Gina K Designs master layouts. Now, she has a bunch of these now, and these are basic dies that are great for layering and creating elements on your cards. I decided to organize them by putting them on magnetic sheets in these little sleeve protectors. And then I also trace the die with a black Sharpie onto the magnetic paper. That way I can be sure that the correct die goes back with the correct set. I was getting them mixed up, and this has really helped me out. So if you look at that magnetic sheet, you can see I traced the dies on there. Now this is the one I'll be using today. It's the Master Layouts 4. I really like these two little banner dies, and you can layer them together or use them separately. On all of my cards today, I use one or the other of those banner dies. Let's start with this example where I make the banner die longer, and I also add a holographic white heat embossed butterfly. I do this on a few cards. So off screen, I white heat embossed a butterfly onto holographic cardstock, and I use the coordinating die to cut it out. Any specialty cardstock would work for this, even silver matte cardstock. You can see the stamp set that I used over here on the left. It's called Kindness and Love from Gina, or Love and Kindness from Gina K Designs. It's an old favorite of mine. I glued that white heat embossed holographic die cut onto two stacked white die cuts of the same shape, just to give it some dimension. For a sentiment on this one, I'll be using the 4x6 stamp set in this Gina K Watercolor Spring kit. Now this came out last month and it's now back in stock. It has two 4x6 stamp sets, 6 ink cubes, 2 layering stencils, lots of pre-printed die cuts in pattern paper, and coordinating dies for the stamp set. All of that is included in the kit. A lot of value to it. I'll be using both the stamp sets during this video. Here's a closer look at the so many sentiments that is included in that kit. I used 2 different sentiments from this on different cards today, including So Thankful for a Friend Like You and You Make Me Smile. I created a white cardstock faux stitch banner die cut using one of the dies from the Gina K Master Layouts 4 die set that I just showed you. Onto that banner, towards the bottom, I stamped the You Make Me Smile. And now I can add the butterfly directly above that. But I want this banner to be longer. It's kind of short. I'm going to show you a trick on how to make it longer. First, I'll glue 2 additional white die cuts behind our stamped die cut banner. This just gives it dimension. You can skip that if you want. Now I'll glue the bottom of the butterfly onto the top of this banner die cut. Now I'll take another banner die cut and glue it towards the top back of the butterfly. From the front, it looks like this is one long die cut, but it's actually 2 glued together. So the butterfly die cut is hiding the seam. So now we can glue this towards the top left corner, and I'll cut the top of that banner die cut off. I love looking for ways to get different looks for my dies, and in this case, I make that banner die cut look longer. I'll show you another way to do this later on. For this simple card design, I'll just glue this on the top left and trim off the excess, and I'm done. I feel like the background of this card has a lot going on. So much shimmer, so much color. I want that to be really the focal point. And that holographic cardstock behind the butterfly really picks up the colors of the background and adds even more shine. This is all glued onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. This is actually a pretty quick and simple card to pull together. That background is fast to make, and then we just added those simple die cuts on top. We really are allowing the techniques that we did to shine, and that makes for a dynamite card. I did a few more cards with this same design. Here we have our blue background. This is where the dots are impressed, and we had filled them with the magical powders. So you can see how the shimmer is kind of tucked in the dots, and there's lots of color and even more shimmer around it. I did the same technique of hiding where those two banner die cuts meet behind our holographic and white heat embossed butterfly. Here's one of my other favorite backgrounds from today. This was the second generation of the bold one I showed you a couple cards ago. The nice thing about this card design is you could leave it blank where that sentiment is. Just don't put anything there. And when you have a particular occasion that you have a need for a card, you could stamp that sentiment right in the open spot, such as with sympathy, thank you, happy birthday, or whatever. Today I went for more thank you type cards because that's what I need the most. I did need a couple thinking of you or sympathy cards, so I created those in the same style. And I used softer backgrounds for those. This sentiment is also from that watercolor spring kit that I just showed you a moment ago. You could really use any sentiments and any die cut on there. I use a butterfly because I like butterflies, but you could use a leaf, you could use a flower, you could do something playful if that's what you prefer. Okay, my next few cards are super simple, even more so than the last one. In this case, I used a few different sentiment sets. This is the Gina K Designs Painted Blossom stamp set. It's a small one, so it's got a great price point, and there are lots of great sentiments in here. I chose the Many Thanks, and I black heat embossed that onto the bottom of the stitch banner die cut from the Master Layouts 4 set. I also black heat embossed the butterfly on white cardstock to add to this card. So I didn't color in those images. I just did black heat embossing to make it have a little shine, but you could do black ink alone if you prefer. So I glued the butterfly to the top of this banner die cut, and then I glued that right to the center of my card. Super simple. You could add color to the butterfly, you could add other embellishments, but I feel like the background on this was enough. There's lots of shimmer, especially that iridescent shimmer, so I wanted to keep it simple. Again, the background was trimmed and added to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I do think it's worth saying again, I really like these Lindy's powders because of the shimmer it has. But if you have other watercolors and you want to add shimmer to it, try just adding Ranger Perfect Pearls. I like to mention many different ways to achieve a certain look, so you can try to use what you have on hand. All right, here we have one of the backgrounds where we used that plaid embossing folder. Trimmed that down, added it onto a white note card, and did the same basic technique, but this time with a white heat embossed butterfly on holographic cardstock, which I think steps it up a bit and matches the shine on the background, and then a with sympathy type of sentiment. This type of simple card design is also a great opportunity to use sentiments from older stamp sets. Just dig through what you have. I really like this one from Gina K Designs. All of these caring sentiments are really wonderful to give for different occasions, and I thought this was a nice way to kind of change up a basic thank you card. And I love this background because it's soft, but you have those bold dots and splotches of color and shimmer thanks to using the magical powders in the embossing folder. It really presses it into the pattern. All right, the next card uses the Gina K Designs Delightful Daisies stamp set. This is another I've used many times. There are a few different sentiments in here that would work for these cards. I chose one that says, "Thank you for being a friend." I like that this banner die cut fits a variety of sentiments, and there are actually 2 in the set. The faux stitched banner die is a little bit smaller than this solid banner die. So if you wanted to layer them together, you could, or you could use whichever fits your sentiment better. By the way, on this card, I white heat embossed the butterfly in gold cardstock, so it matched the background better. Okay, now I wanted to show you a really fun trick for using that banner die and making it longer. Last time we covered the seams with a die cut, but on this card design I couldn't do that. So we're going to do a little bit of partial die cutting. All right, I have my die cut machine. You could use whatever die cut machine you have. And I'm putting my banner die onto a piece of white cardstock. I'll take the top cutting plate and only cover part of the die. Be sure to tape it in place, by the way. So I'm covering part of the die, leaving that straight edge hanging out. I'll run that through my die cut machine. What's hanging out will not cut. What's underneath the cutting plate will. So now we have that bottom part of the banner cut, but not the top. So I'll put this back into my die cut machine, and I will take the die and flip it around and line up the edges of the die with the edges we've already cut. It'll pop in like a puzzle piece. I'll then tape that into place. It's best to tape it to hold it, and do the same thing again, covering most of the die, but not that straight edge hanging out there to the right. I'll run that through, and this gives us a new shape. So I encourage you to look at your dies and determine different ways you can use them to create new shapes or bigger die cuts to suit whatever card design you want to do. Okay, now let's move on to a third basic design and make a bunch of cards with that. Remember earlier I told you that the Tapestry embossing folder had a stamp set that matched that Gina came out with years ago. That's it here, the holiday Tapestry stamp set. I thought I would stamp that onto our white banner die cut. I'm sticking the die cut onto my Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat and putting that into my stamping tool. I'm lining up the Tapestry stamp, and then I'll stamp this with a super light ink. I'm using Gina K Designs Sea Glass, and instead of dabbing the ink pad or tapping the ink pad onto Inkit, I'm swiping it back and forth. That gives you a lighter impression. Now this will get glued onto our background, and I'll have the top of it hang off. For sentiment, I chose the Gina K Designs A Little Hello Stencil Bundle because it includes that Hello die set that you see on the left. Ignore the friend there. I decided not to use it in this video. I cut the Hello from black cardstock, and I put glue on the back of it, and then I will glue that right onto our banner die cut towards the bottom, leaving a tiny bit of room under there to stamp a sub-sentiment. Now I can put glue on the back of this banner and put it right onto our card. I did put additional die cuts on the back of it just to give it dimension, but you don't need to do so. All right, to finish this off, I did stamp Sweet Friend with black ink underneath, and that is from the A Little Hello bundle that I mentioned before that the hello is from. I also added a few pearls around it and a gold die cut butterfly. I feel like when you have so much going on in the background, it's best to keep what you add pretty simple, and that's what we have here. I also gave our focal point a little backdrop, and that is that white banner die cut. That way the hello stands out even more against the bold background. Now I was pretty happy with this design, so I made multiples this way. Here is one where we did kind of a wash of color, but I added the white pigment ink over the impression to make it stand out more. And I used the hello die cut with the small stamp sentiment, pearls, and a butterfly die cut. I will also share more cards here that are the same design but using different backgrounds. This is something that I encourage you to do. Experiment with different inking techniques or embossing folder techniques and create a lot of backgrounds. Then you can come up with a few basic designs to use for those backgrounds and change up the sentiments as needed. On this one, I stamped You Make Me Happy, and that is from that stamp set in that watercolor spring kit that I showed you earlier. All of this is linked below. In this case, you have lots of blues, greens, and golds in the background, so I use gold accents to pull out that shimmer. So I hope if you have embossing folders, even ones you've had for years, that you will try this technique of using watercolor on the inside. You could use sprays, you can use stains, you can use watercolor or powders like I did. It just really presses the color in and creates that beautiful impression. And by the way, don't worry, I was able to remove the color from my embossing folders by running them underwater. All right, always, I link the supplies to multiple sources in my YouTube description below, but you can also go to my blog where there's the ability to save individual cards or videos for future reference, has all the supplies and photos there, and much, much more. At the end here, I'll link to a couple related videos that I hope you find helpful. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.